Okay, my name is Justin Greenslade and I am the founder of ISONOE, which is a company that hand builds audio equipment in London, and we've been going since 2004. And our first product was the isolation feet initially for Technics turntables, and we've been selling them for 15 years now. They've sort of taken on the life of their own. We've sold them to universities, and diverse people come up with all manner of ways of implementing the isolation feet. And they were originally targeted at the Technics, and they still are. But people have used them. We got nominated for an award a few years back, actually, because a chap was having problems with microphonic valves in a power amp. As you know, valves don't like vibration, and he got set fitted them and told the magazine about it, and so that's one of the great things about designing products, is that they take on a life of their own, and people think of applications for them that you never thought of. And it's actually one of the most rewarding things as a hardware designer that I can think of, really, when somebody thinks of something that you didn't. And it's kind of, in a way, you can sort of kick yourself a little bit and think, why didn't I think of that? But at the same time, it's wonderful because it's taken a life of its own. So anyway, yeah, so we've got one of our sort of only mixer that we make as a product at the moment, which is called the ISO420. And we've been making this mixer since early 2016. Yeah, I mean, it's a mixer preamplifier. It has performance that's as good, if not better. I have to be honest, I've tested a lot of hi-fi preamplifiers. I think this is as good as anything I've tested in terms of measured metrics, in terms of hiss, distortion, crosstalk, frequency response, etc. One of the interesting features on this mixer is that it has very high internal headroom. It's pretty much impossible to clip. I have a party trick when people come over and we put all the faders at maximum, and you can see that the distortion is kind of 0.003 kind of thing, 0.0003, even with all the faders at maximum with a really hot signal going into it. What this means is that there are some mixers where, with the input fader, if you start pushing the input fader past kind of 2 or 3 o'clock, they start to saturate, and some of them even clip. This one, what you can do with the input fader is just put it bang at maximum. It actually gives its best THD and noise performance with the input fader at maximum. And when you do put the input fader at maximum, you actually form a short circuit and you're bypassing that pot. So basically, once you do that, input goes to output, and the pot is simply a very minor load in the signal path, but it's actually a straight wire. And when you do that, I mean, even if you knock it down 10 dB, the performance is still pretty good in terms of THD and noise. But yeah, the point is that if you put the input fader at maximum, I invite people to bring hi-fi preamps over to us, and we test them. And we can objectively, can't really demonstrate things subjectively. Obviously, people do listening, and they're welcome to do demos and what have you. But objectively, for the purpose of discussion, put the input fader at maximum, and this, it actually has a better measured performance than preamplifiers that I've tested, which cost the same amount as the whole mixer. And this has 3 stereo phono preamps, 3 line inputs, and a balanced input as well. They are most definitely MM only, and there's a lot of reasons for that, because you could probably count on your hands the DJs who use moving coil. When I'm listening at home, I just have a step-up transformer. I have a selection of preamps, as you can imagine, because I've been building the things for 30 odd years. So. Okay, so it's a 4-channel mixer, and each channel, so you've got 3 phono line, phono line, phono line, and then you've got a stereo balanced input for channel 4. Then starting from the top downwards, this knob is the booth output, this knob is the master output, the main one, and again you have a pair of XLRs, and you also have a pair of RCAs. And then this RCA here is labelled tape. That's a rather quaint terminology for a fixed tape output, which is unaffected by these controls here. So that means that if you're doing a mix, that literally comes from the mix bus, and it will just record the mix, and you can adjust the booth and the master levels independently, and it won't affect what you're taping. This knob here, labelled Q or program, selects what signal, which signal you monitor with the meters. So in the Q position, the meters will follow whatever is being cued on the pre-fade listen, the headphone feed. And you've got a crossfader here, which will crossfade between just the neat pre-fade signal coming in and the mix, because obviously some people like to mix on headphones, in which case you can get yourself a balance with the crossfader. So basically in the Q position, it follows this crossfade, and then you put it in PGM and you get the program, which is affected by the master here. Here you have your 2 isolators, isolator A, isolator B, and you have on each channel a switch here, rotary switch. A is for isolator A, D is if you're just listening on a Sunday and you don't want to use your isolator, B is for B isolator. And when you actuate this switch, it carries no audio, it actuates relays. So all the switching is done via gas-sealed relays. It means that you have a signal path which is as the crow flies. When you open this thing up, you do not see a massive snake of wire in there, because that gives you crosstalk. Basically the signal comes in, it's bosh bosh, and it means that even though this thing is a mixer, it means you've got a shorter signal path than, I reckon, a great deal of hi-fi preamplifiers. It gives you very good performance. Next knob, auxiliary send. So each channel can send out to a delay, reverb, whatever. You have a balanced output for this, which comes here. And you can also put an unbalanced connector in there. It works like a transformer. It doesn't matter whether you put unbalanced or balanced. Same goes for the balanced input on channel 4. That will take unbalanced or balanced. You won't lose 6 dB. In the middle is the headphone controls, and as we were saying, you've got the headphone crossfader here, which crossfades between the direct PFL signal and the mix bus. Then you've got headphone volume, and the beauty of having it in the middle means that ergonomically it is kind of equidistant from all the controls. Moving forward, you've got the shelving equalizers, and I think what's important to bear in mind with this is it's very gentle. If you listen to this EQ on a kind of small bookshelf pair of speakers, it's quite difficult to appreciate it because it is out of band. This EQ is best appreciated on a full bandwidth system. You need a really nice set of monitors to fully appreciate it, and then you will notice it. And I've noticed that getting feedback from clients, some people just kind of leave it at 12 o'clock and they don't totally, get on with it. The guys who seem to really like it tend to be people that have got a pair of PMCs, that kind of thing. I went to an event a couple of weeks ago And I've never done anything like this before, but what's happened where rotary mixers have become a bit of a kind of cult object in the last couple of years. And you typically have these events where they get together a whole load of mixers and everybody tries the mixer and auditions it and tests it. And, I mean, it's obviously, it's kind of highly subjective, and a lot of it's down to the layout, whether you like the layout, everything's logically placed where you expect to find it. And then obviously people will give their opinion on the sound. And I thought it would be very interesting to go along to this event, and obviously they were going to compare them in the usual way. But we took an audio precision analyzer, and in order to test the various mixers, so they had, we actually tested 7 in the end. We had that was what time permitted, and it was absolutely mind-boggling, to be honest with you. What we found was that there are mixers out there that have relatively high price tags, and I'll be really honest with you, the amount of hiss, the amount of crosstalk, a lot of them have very, very funky frequency response curves. And I personally do not want a mixer or a preamplifier that dictates to me frequency response, because particularly if you're going to be using it in a live venue, you're going to have a secondary EQ, you're going to tune the room. So, in an ideal world, you'd have a very sophisticated but very low distortion, high performance EQ where you can, kind of work on where the modes are in the room, and, you get mode at 300 hertz or whatever, and we'll work on that and put a small notch there or whatever. So anyway, it was mind-boggling. The guy who organised the event has got all the results, and he's going to be posting them at some point, and no doubt that will create a lot of gnashing of teeth. But it was interesting, and what's really interesting, I think one of the most fascinating aspects of what I do is to unite empirical evidence when people come to you and they say, this sounds in such a way, with the technical metrics. And for example, we had a particular mixer there that was supplied by a rental company. And the chap brought it along to get it tested, and he said, everyone who rents this tells us how warm it sounds. They just think it's the most warm mixer. And we tested it. What we found was it had enormous high frequency roll-off. So by about 10K, it was already about something like 1 or 2 dB down. By about 20K, it was about 3 or 4 dB down. So it had this big roll-off curve on the high frequency. And obviously, that's kind of the warm cliche, isn't it? This kind of soft sound, your grandfather's stereo, which hadn't had its valves changed in 20 years, that you listened to as a kid, it sounds warm. I'm suggesting that the stereotype of what people might associate being warmth is quite possibly a rolled off frequency response in the top end. Right. Well, this was another thing that we found out at this testing event, is that in order to get really good frequency response between the two channels where they match and where you have the same phase response as well, which is very important, you need to use tight tolerance components. And that's a huge, tight tolerance passives, huge cost in making a mixer, huge cost in making preamps, and a lot of companies cut corners. And if you skimp, you use like a 10% or a 20% tolerance instead of a 1%, for example, you will typically get sort of phase shift and frequency response anomalies between left and right, and it will cause, from a stereo perspective, it will degrade the sound quality. It will have all kinds of effects. So one of the things that we do with the 420 is we use tight tolerance components throughout, particularly in anything to do with EQ and filtering. And we don't just buy tight tolerance components, but we actually test them before we fit them, and we have a procedure where we vet everything. We vet all kinds of components that go in here. We have a variety of test jigs, so that, you know, I mean, the funny thing is that if you send out a mixer and there's, say, I don't know, 0.4 dB mismatch or something, you'd have to have an incredible listening setup to actually hear it. You know, you'd need probably, let alone speakers, you'd need very high-end headphones maybe. But the point is that if you can see it on a piece of test equipment, straight away it affects your faith in what you're selling to somebody. You know, maybe a more cynical engineer might look at, you know, I plug it in for the last test on the analyzer and I go, oh crikey, there's a 0.4 dB mismatch, and I will, you know, send it back and we'll replace the part and we'll fix it. And somebody who's a bit cynical might say, well, who's going to hear 0.4 dB? Why are you worrying about that? And they're probably right, but the point is it's like your faith in what you're giving to somebody. I hand you something that you've bought, and I have to have, you know, you know, you kind of, I believe that, you know, your whole body language and everything, you know, you have to be honest, it has to have integrity, and you have to, you know, really believe in it. And then if somebody comes back to you after a year and says such and such and such, you know, you have to know that what you gave them has integrity, it's 100%, you tested it. One thing that was pretty cool is that there's a pretty well-known DJ based in Berlin, Dixon, who has one of these mixers. And he's done literally probably thousands of gigs now. He's one of the hardest working guys on the circuit. And his mixer came back to me after several hundred, possibly 1,000 gigs. And I plugged it into our analyzer, and it came back with exactly the same THD and noise figure as when I gave it to him 2 years before, to the decimal point. I made a video of it. Were I better at marketing, I would have posted it and tried to kind of trumpet it, but instead the video sits on my phone, not really benefiting anybody. I guess I'm very much guilty of being kind of your midnight engineer and not marketeer. So the kind of marketing, I've never, you know, the website, rather embarrassingly, wasn't updated. It was updated recently, but the previous update was 2016, and people were emailing me and they're like, are you still alive as a company? So marketing is not, I mean, I've always been of the opinion that it's kind of substance, you know, content over, you know, because obviously the world we live in is kind of, you know, it's a lot of kind of superficial marketing going on, isn't there? You know, products are marketed very well, but, you know, the marketing and the integrity of the product aren't, you know, necessarily, you can have high quality marketing and a poor quality product, you know, it happens.